distinguished speakers will discuss this important questions of whether Europe is prepared to exercise greater independence within the alliance. And to moderate this next ministerial panel, please allow me to welcome back to the stage our host, Zbigniew Pisarski. Zbigniew, please join me on stage.
Hello again. Thank you very much. And please, my dear panelists, wonderful to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, we have very short time, so I will try to be very dynamic. I have wonderful panelists with me. Let me introduce Minister of Defense of Norway, Mr. Bjørn. Bjørn, great to have you here with us.
Well, good to be here. Thank you.
Minister of State for Defense from the United Kingdom, Lord Vernon Coaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great to have you. And our special guest from the United States, I'm saying special because Celeste is not the first time at the Warsaw Security Forum, and I'm really, really happy to have you here again with us. And Celeste Wallander is Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs at the U.S. Department of Defense. Great to have you, Celeste.
Thanks so much, Zbigniew.
So we have a discussion about European pillar of NATO. Is Europe able to defend itself? So let me ask the first question to Celeste. Celeste, are European nations meeting their defense spending commitments? This is a common request that we hear from over Atlantic. And is the current level of investment sufficient for the continent's security needs? How can Europe ensure equitable burden sharing with NATO, especially in light of rising geopolitical threats? Celeste.
Thanks so much, Zbigniew. Thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you to all of you for what I know is going to be a fantastic 2 days of discussion. Yes, Europe is able to defend itself, and yes, Europe is contributing to what is required for transatlantic security. 23 members of NATO announced at the historic Washington NATO summit this summer that they had met the 2% floor of defense spending, and other allies have reported a very credible and concrete plans for meeting that requirement. But that's just the start. What we have seen are NATO allies enhancing their defense procurement, their defense planning. Countries, we heard Poland has been investing across the different domains required for defense, but Poland is far from the only NATO ally. NATO allies agreed to very robust regional plans for NATO and multi-domain plans to support those regional plans, have stood up a new command for Norfolk to be able to better plan for the kind of conflict, unfortunately, we have to understand that Russia may have in store. And NATO members have enhanced our exercises together and the interoperability of our forces, with more work to do, but that is part of the path for the Hague Summit. So yes, Europe is able to defend itself, but what I want to emphasize is that Europe is not going to defend itself alone. The United States has been with Europe, we are with Europe, and every single one of the plans I just referred to is about the United States working in an integrated way with the NATO allies in order to create effective defense and credible deterrence. So yes, there is a European defense capability that is extraordinary and growing, but it's not a separate pillar. It is, with the United States, a foundation for European security.
Celeste, if I might ask you a kind of brief follow-up question. This spring, we have been organizing the Weimar Triangle delegation to U.S. Congress when there were decisions taken on supporting Ukraine, the provision bill. And we had a meeting at the Heritage Foundation. And a very kind gentleman from Heritage Foundation told us that for Mr. Trump, if elected as president, every EU spending on defense in frame of the EU will be a red flag because it's not in frame of NATO. How would you respond to that? Because from my perspective, if Texas is investing in its defense, it's not against the United States of America. So is there a challenge that we have in Europe how to address EU defense spendings?
So clearly, every euro or zloty spent on national defense for members of NATO is for the NATO alliance. The fact that the EU also has a defense identity and a defense frame does not take away from those national defense capabilities that are, as I understand it, first and foremost dedicated by NATO allies to the NATO alliance. And that's another significant achievement of the last 2 years, which is NATO allies, the United States among them, but not alone, have allocate or will allocate and put under NATO SACEUR's command all of their NATO their national defense forces to the defense of the alliance. So that is what we in the United States focus on, what is available to NATO, and as each member of NATO builds its capabilities, enhances its modernization, invests in that interoperability, and focuses on all that is required as an alliance, that is strengthening NATO's defense and therefore enhancing NATO's deterrence against any Russian provocations or potential aggression.
Thank you, Celeste. Let me ask Minister Bjørn. Norway is known for its autonomy in Europe. How can Europe enhance its strategic autonomy while remaining a reliable and integrated pillar of NATO? Should the European Union pursue a more self-sufficient defense strategy, or is a collective defense through NATO the only viable path for Europe?
Well, yeah, thank you. We could ask what is strategic autonomy. Really, I'm not sure. For me, it sounds, I don't want to offend anyone, but sounds a bit like some EU lingo, EU defense versus NATO. I don't know. From a Norwegian perspective, a little other starting point here. We are not member of the European Union. We are a close partner, of course. I myself signed a strategic partnership with the High Representative Borrell earlier this year. But let's be absolutely clear that we are part of a successful alliance. We celebrated 75 years in Washington this summer, and we don't need to discuss, is there any alternative structures, force structure, command structures, that kind of thing. But let's look at what is complementary then. And I remember a picture, it was from last year when the Prime Minister Støre of Norway, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Union, and Jens Stoltenberg from NATO was together on a Norwegian oil platform, securing energy for the continental Europe. I think this is the picture, and I think it's more about what can we do together. And when it comes to resilience, when it comes to industry production capacity and so on, then we have a lot of work to do in Europe, members or non-members of the European Union. But what this really is about is burden sharing, that we all do our part. I think, if we want to influence, then, yeah, we do our part. Remember Article 3, not just Article 5. I think this is how we secure our position in Europe as a part of NATO, contributing, cooperating, and finding good solutions with our North American partners.
So let me ask a more direct question. Are you satisfied with the support of the United States in the Ukrainian defense from Russian aggression?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think the American leadership here has been absolutely crucial. Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the leadership of Lloyd Austin has been absolutely essential. And of course, the support when it comes to defense material. But it's what we do together, and we have to look into how can we do even more. It's important for all of us that Russia doesn't succeed in Ukraine. This is the first line of defense. So we are looking into, we have our 5-year Nansen program in Norway. We almost announced that we're almost going to double that effort now in this year and the years to come. So I think it's a common challenge for all of us to look into how can we dig deeper and do even more to support Ukraine.
Thank you very much. My next question is, and the last one, because I would like to give the floor to the audience. So if you have some questions, I will try to collect them in frame of the time I was given. But Lord Coaker, what are the current military capability gaps in Europe's defense forces, and how can they be addressed? Are European nations prepared to respond to large-scale conventional military threats without relying on US support?
Well, let me start by saying, first of all, as the new government in the UK, we remain fully committed to seeing a successful outcome in Ukraine, and we remain committed to working with allies in the US and beyond to ensure that we're successful in Ukraine. There'll be no change from the previous government's support for the actions in Ukraine, and we will see it through to the end, and we've committed money and resources to do that. I think it's an important statement to make right at the beginning of this conference from the new UK government. Alongside that, I think what it has shown, however, is in all of us working together, as our Norwegian and US colleagues have said, that the importance of alliances. So it's the US, of course, is hugely important, has made huge contributions to Ukraine in the defence of freedom and democracy, but so has all of Europe standing together to resist what's happening there, because everyone, as our Norwegian colleague has just said, recognises that it's actually something which is a fight on behalf of all of us. It's a common fight. The front line is in Ukraine, and that's why it's so important to all of us. Has it shown capability gaps? Of course it's shown capability gaps. We've shown, for example, that some of the issues around the ability to provide munitions and equipment as quickly as we would want to the Ukraine has not been at the level we would want. And the response from Europe to that is what more do we do to work together to ensure that we can get equipment there more quickly? What does it mean for our own stockpiles? Because you'll know in individual nations, certainly in the UK, to provide the necessary munitions to Ukraine has depleted our own stockpiles. So we're looking very carefully now about how we increase, extend and develop those to actually provide more. It's also caused all of us to reflect on how much we're spending on defence. And Poland is an example. Poland's massive increase in defence spending, which many other countries across Europe are also following, shows the importance of that. And that's indeed why in the UK we're going to increase to 2.5% of GDP, and we're conducting a defence review to see how we meet the threats of the future. So the gaps have been identified, but it's been a cause for Europe to come together with the US to say how do we actually address that and what do we do about it. And Ukraine has caused all of us to reflect on that. But in the end, what it is about all of us in this room, all of the countries in this room, through the alliances, which is the only way we can do that, is to defend freedom and democracy and human rights and the rules, the international rules-based order in the Ukraine. The Ukraine is the front line for that. And the capability gaps, we've sought to overcome them. But they've shown to us that not only now, but in the future, not only defence spending will have to rise, but also the stockpiles that we need in order to provide the munitions and the equipment to fight those wars. But we also need to look at the new ways of fighting. I'll just finish by saying this. One of the most interesting things when our defence review is starting to identify, and I know all of you will be looking at, the use of technology in the Ukraine, the changing ways of fighting in the Ukraine. We have to respond to that as well. And the importance of autonomous aircraft, the drones, all of those sorts of things are also a reflection on the lessons that we need to learn and some of the capabilities that we will need to develop in order to fight the wars and the conflicts of the future. Nothing is more important than that. And that's why this security forum here today is so important. Yes, there's a cause for us to reflect on what we could have done, but it's also a reflection on how much we have done and what we will do in the future.
I fully agree with you, Lord Coaker, that war in Ukraine is disruptive for even defense industry gathered also in this room. When we see drones worth $2,000-3,000 destroying equipment worth $20-30 million, then there is a question for those that are making procurements in defense area. But I have one brief follow-up question, maybe not easy, but when you observe the awareness of our American colleagues about the significance of conflict in Ukraine. Do you think that they understand the relevance of victory in Ukraine for American credibility? Do you believe that they are aware of the consequences of potentially negative scenario in Ukraine for the credibility of US as a global player?
Do I think, if that's to me, do I think the US understands that? Absolutely. I think the US understands that. The US has always stood with Europe. If you go back,
you spoke with Republicans in US?
Well, I think that it will continue. I think the US will stand with Europe. Does it understand that? What we have to recognise, I think, one of the important questions for all of us, is that what happens in Europe affects the Indo-Pacific. What happens in the Indo-Pacific affects Europe. I was in Korea and Vietnam last week. The Vietnamese are really worried about the fact that Ukraine has caused Russia and China to work more collaboratively together. They've always worked, their security has always been based, or mainly based on the fact that Russia and China have actually not been as close allies to each other. So the conflict in Europe is affecting the Indo-Pacific and vice versa. I think America recognises that. I think the UK recognises that. I think all of us recognises that. Security in one region is indivisible from security in another. The US recognises that. It's been a proud supporter of Europe through its history and will continue to do so.
Thank you, sir, for this optimism. I wish it also to the Taiwanese delegation that we have in this room. And let me give the floor to our audience. Do we have some questions? We can try to collect, I think, 2 of them. So I see one question from Jędrzej Bielecki from Rzeczpospolita Daily.
Yes, good,
yes.
Good morning. I have a question to Secretary Wallander, because you were very optimistic, saying twice that Europe can defend itself without the US. If so, if Donald Trump is elected in less than 2 months, everything is fine and we don't need any more the US and we just could be, safe against Russian aggression. That's what you mean? Thank you.
Do we have another question? I see here at... Yes, maybe let's collect both. Maybe they are overlapping. Or
yes, it's not, Edward Lucas from CEPA, it's not just the possibility of all-out military conflict that's worrying people. It's the hybrid aggression we're seeing right now. And some European allies seem to be getting the message from Washington that it's better to shut up about these provocations rather than to respond, because we don't want an October surprise or whatever. But I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts about how we recreate our deterrence against these hybrid attacks that are happening in Europe right now.
Thank you, Ed. And maybe the last question, so we have our 3 panelists, and then we'll have 1 minute each to answer. General in the first row. But for the translation and recording, please, just microphone provide, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
General Piotr Brazeusz, I'm the Eurocorps commander currently. An easy question, because Eurocorps is a dual force for NATO and EU, so I'm working for both organizations. From your high-level perspective, which areas you think we can look and strengthen for the purpose of convergence between the NATO and EU? So instead of talking about the autonomy, that we rather look for harmony and complementarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Celeste.
All right, quickly. So the United States and Europe, NATO allies, but also many of whom are members of the EU, must work together for credible defense and deterrence against Russia. So what I reject is the notion that you separate these things, and it's not I don't want to frame it the way that has been framed a great deal, which is what is the results of American politics. The results of American politics will get sorted out in America, where I'm representing the Department of Defense here abroad, so I speak for the United States right now. And speaking for the United States right now, the United States needs Europe. It's not just Europe that needs the United States. Yes, American global credibility is at stake in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and yes, China is watching. And the United States could not have achieved what has been achieved in support, the principled political, diplomatic, economic, and military support of Ukraine against the Russian onslaught without Europe. Half of the security assistance delivered to Ukraine has been delivered by Europe, not the United States, along with the United States. The ability of the United States to supply Ukraine is because of the close relationships we have with European countries, not least among them Poland. The ability to credibly send a message to Moscow that they should not escalate this conflict beyond their horrible invasion of Ukraine and to sustain the support to Ukraine is because of the strength of the NATO alliance, and the Kremlin sees that. So talking of Europe versus the United States, who could do it, actually sends the wrong message not only to Moscow, but to Beijing. And so we have to remain united in our principled, but also hard-headed security interest support for European security, and European security includes Ukraine, and that builds to global security. To Edward's question about hybrid threats, they are taken and activities. Russian subkinetic, gray zone, I don't like hybrid, gray zone subkinetic activities in Europe, we take it very seriously. I can't talk about measures we've taken here in this forum, but we do not dismiss that. And it's not going to help to, so we are very clear that this is Russia's attempt to compete somewhere where it believes it has an advantage, and the last thing you ever want to do is to concede to the adversary the initiative to successfully compete in areas where it believes, in this case incorrectly, that it can get away with activities without response, without building defense and credible deterrence. And I think I'll...
Thank you, Celeste, for this encouraging words from American friends. Mr. Bjørn.
Yeah, I just maybe I just have a brief follow-up of the general's point, because I absolutely agree. Let's not discuss autonomy, but complementarity, and what do we do together, and related to that, let's also discuss how we standardize, because we have seen when it comes to what can we do together, and I think we have learned some lessons when it comes to the donations, the support for Ukraine. You know, we have tried to send military equipment that we thought was identical with our neighbors. It's called the same, it looks the same, but it's not the same. It's different calibers, it's a different communication system, and so on. So if we really want to make this work better, then also look into how we can standardize and be more interoperable and interchangeable. I think that's a main challenge for the alliance, and also within the European part of the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Lord Coaker.
Thank you very much. I mean, I very much agree with the comments of our American colleague about the strengthening of NATO in the face of the Ukrainian aggression. I mean, Finland and Sweden joining has been an amazing strengthening of NATO, and I think Putin thought that NATO would certainly be weak in the face of what happened, and in fact the alternative has taken place, and I think personally that will continue in the future, and I agree about the US commitment to Europe. On the issue of hybrid warfare, I mean, I think it's absolutely right to continue to discuss that. It's difficult to say in an open forum too much about that, but it is taken extremely seriously, and will be something of an increasing area of interest for us all, I think. So thank you for raising it. It's something that sometimes is not discussed as much as it should be, and I think it's a very good point to have raised. On the issue of cooperation, there's just a couple of examples. I think the General was right about the need for cooperation. Technology would be one area that I think that cooperation together will be important, and we've seen the importance of technology and measures to do this and countermeasures. I think that's going to become increasingly important, and will be us joining, where the US, for obvious reasons, are particularly important to us for obvious reasons. So I think technology is one area. I think the other area where we're going to have to work more is in the area of interoperability of our equipment and the defence industrial cooperation, and we can already see evidence of that with countries working together to to do different parts of a particular piece of equipment together, where they've got the specialism, whether it's around an engine or the weapon or the munition or whatever. I think defence industry cooperation will be another area where countries across NATO and beyond are going to have to work more closely together to deliver the outcome that we all want. So technology and defence industry would be two areas that I would point to that increased collaboration as well in the future. Of course, there'll be others, but they're two just as examples.
Thank you, Lord, very much. Referring to the comparison that Minister Shevera used, I believe that our European colleagues, they all bought tickets, monthly tickets to the gym to get fit. We have equipment. Now we need a good partner, maybe a kind of assistant trainer who can let us grow in the proper direction. And I believe that the answer to our panel, is Europe ready to deter and to defend itself? I think we are on the right path in a good company of our American colleagues, and let's send a strong signal to our Russian colleagues just to stop and withdraw, move a step back. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Brief.